Hello, good evening and welcome to Biz1st Review 360, your weekly roundup of the top business news and developments impacting the economy. I'm Nadim Majid. Before we move on to our top stories this week, it's been quite tumultuous for Sri Lanka. It all culminated with the resignation of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ravi Karunanika, following the explosive revelations that came to light during the hearings of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry on bond issuances. We'll be talking later on in the program to Transparency International Sri Lanka regarding preventing the next crisis and the need for an MP interest register. But before that, here's a quick recap of this week's top stories.
Central Bank Governor Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy has brought transparency to relations with the International Monetary Fund by authorizing the release of economic reports which were earlier restricted or suppressed. An IMF letter of intent said, quote, "In keeping with its policy of transparency, the government has authorized the publication of this letter and its attachments as well as the associated staff report," unquote. There were concerns flagged in the media over the delay or alleged withholding of IMF reports since 2008.
With the Hambantota port deal with China Merchant Port Holdings, Sri Lanka will soon become a key maritime node in China's One Belt, One Road initiative that aims to link China to Europe via Central Asia, the Persian Gulf, the Mediterranean through West Asia and the Indian Ocean via South Asia. With increased shipping and commercial activity, what responsibilities fall under the purview of Sri Lanka in the future?
Sri Lanka, of course, is a country, as an island nation, has huge maritime interests. You have very large maritime areas to the north and to the west. You have the boundary with India, but to the east and to the south you have the full extent of the exclusive economic zone up to 200 nautical miles, 370 kilometers. So you have an exclusive economic zone that is several times the size of the island itself. Now, in that zone you have rights and responsibilities, and for instance responsibilities with respect to conservation of fisheries, but also ensuring safety of navigation and security. If you have an enormous increase in the future of shipping, you will have Sri Lanka, of course, will have to take all kinds of measures. One of those measures will be to put adequate legislation in place. I don't know in detail all the legislation that you have, but it will be important to look carefully at that. For instance, security, the risk of piracy, etc., will all have to be addressed. For that, apart from legislation and knowing exactly what your rights and responsibilities are in the international law, you also will need organizational and operational measures for the Coast Guard, for instance, to be adequately equipped to deal with all these the increased traffic along your coast.
Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe told the International Tea Convention organised by the Tea Traders Association to celebrate 150 years of Ceylon tea that new laws will be introduced to improve the efficiency and productivity of regional plantation companies.
As far as the regional plantation companies are concerned belong to the state, we will bring in a law. We shall put out the duties and the functions, and you will find a more active golden shareholder, not a sleeping one. And they'll all be accountable to Parliament.
Premier Wickremesinghe also informed the tea industry that the government will continue to assess the performance of the RPCs.
We will assess the performance of the RPCs. Nothing for nothing is my policy. So bad performers should exist in the sector. The country can't pay the price for it. While the good performers must be encouraged to modernize and go ahead, face competition from outside. RPCs will have to become standalone companies, not taken into large groups, added on to the balance sheet so they get a better return or price for their shares.
Stay tuned to Biz1st Review 360. On the other side of this short commercial break, a chat with the Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. Welcome back to the program. Can an MP interest register really prevent corruption? Can it really prevent the next crisis? we had a chat with the Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka, Asoka Obesekara.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Sonali Wanigapatake. Joining us in our studios is the Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka, Asoka Obesekara. Good evening and welcome to the show, Asoka.
Good evening, Sonali.
Asoka, in an unprecedented move, yesterday saw the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ravi Karnanayaka, making a special statement in Parliament saying he is resigning from his post. As the Executive Director of TI Sri Lanka, what are your thoughts on this?
I think that's welcome news. It was clear that the government, public trust in the government had really dipped significantly. But what I would say, though, is that we should be able to distinguish between what is a political outcome and a criminal justice outcome.
Could you elaborate on this?
Well, in the sense that the resignation of a minister is not a finding of wrongdoing.
Sure.
It is about the optics and how the optics impact the government. But I think what the public is really calling for is on this entire matter surrounding central bank bonds that have been, government bonds that have been issued, justice needs to be seen there. And so the fact that something is just a political outcome, being the resignation of a minister, is not sufficient on its own. A fair criminal justice outcome must be arrived at.
Let's also talk a bit about the nexus between business confidence and politics. There is a direct link, isn't there?
I mean, there is. The nexus between politics and business is not a unique issue to Sri Lanka. I think one of the big challenges, though, is that the way in which our governance structure functions, there is no way in which those sorts of interests and connections can be proactively disclosed. So one thing that we have spoken about at TI Sri Lanka, which would be ideal in these situations, is to have some form of interest register for elected officials. Because when you have an interest register, what does it do? Above all else, it protects honest politicians and honest business people who are willing to have their connection in the public sphere. In this situation, if there was an opportunity for the former foreign minister to have declared his interest, the fact that someone has paid for his apartment, then questions may have been raised at that point. But at the moment, the system doesn't even accommodate his or provide the ability to even declare that interest. So at every single juncture, there is public mistrust.
If we take other jurisdictions, for example, the United Kingdom, it is mandated that there is an interest register for parliamentarians where they're supposed to declare all their interests, and the information is before the public domain. Since we don't have a mechanism to, since Sri Lanka doesn't have a mechanism for this, what should be the way forward? I mean,
firstly, I would say that you're quite right. I mean, countries like the UK have an interest register. And, you know, let's say if some business interest pays for an international trip of a parliamentarian, those things must be disclosed. But I would say that we don't even need to look at the UK. Even looking to what we have at present, we have asset declarations. So this idea of disclosure is not a foreign concept to us. It is actually something which has been going on since the mid-70s. So disclosing assets is a norm. I have been able to get to my hands more than half of the entire Parliament's asset disclosures. And I can assure you, Sonali, that if that sort of information was in the public domain, it has very, very, very sweeping consequences, and public accountability will make things as we know it right now significantly different.
But there's a problem.
There is, which is that there are all these secrecy provisions. So even though you have the right to that information, if I show you what I have in my hands, I'm liable to a 2-year, 2,000 rupee fine and or 2 years of rigorous imprisonment. But the point that I would make there is that even what we have seen over the last sort of 48 hours regarding the resignation of the foreign minister, underlying this all is the fact that because this information has come to the public, the evidence has been put before the public, it has meant that many politicians have had to act. There have been no confidence motions. All of these different things have come about because this information is in the public domain. Similarly, interest registers should be created and in the public domain, and the existing asset declarations that are filed every year should also be published publicly.
Asoka, Sri Lanka is moving into an era of accelerated development. How will these facts that you just mentioned help in bolstering investor confidence in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think one significant factor is that investors enjoy stability.
Sure.
And to ensure stability, the greater information there is in the public, the greater the chances that the investor knows that the state will act on a level playing field. Now, needless to say, there are investors who actually don't like the idea of there being a playing field, you know, because that gives them undue advantage. But what we have to remember is that undue advantage usually comes at the cost of the state. And the state is something which is administered for us, the citizens. So in that sense, having all of these sorts of interests and everything in the public domain mean that illegitimate requests for illegitimate support from business, in addition to business illegitimately giving money unilaterally to elected officials as well, that shady system has light shone upon it.
During election campaigns by political parties, businesses come forward to fund these election campaigns. Now, if we had an interest register in Sri Lanka for parliamentarians, how would this whole dynamic work?
Well, during election time, you're quite right. You speak to many business people who say that they are approached to give support, be it financial directly or to third parties, let's say for printing costs or electioneering costs.
Sure.
Interest registers should declare those sorts of donations as well. One thing is that I think for some business people, the ability to legitimately over the table provide financial support actually gives them some protection from any later aspersion that they are trying to unduly influence elected officials.
Right.
So interest registers would also encompass that. There will be small technical areas regarding how business people support through third parties, let's say through paying a printer, how those sorts of things would work. Those are issues that can easily be ironed out. But the core concept that there should be declaration interest registers which are in the public domain is essential, because then it will help understand how politicians actually function within the system. At the moment, there is no knowledge at all. And what we have seen before the Commission of Inquiry with this evidence regarding payment for an apartment is just a small insight into that sort of nexus which needs to be given greater publicity.
My concluding question to you, Asoka, don't you think that the resignation of one of the most powerful ministers, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka, resigning in light of a pending Presidential Commission of Inquiry investigation into the central bank bond issuance, really goes to show the power of public accountability?
Indeed. I mean, I would reiterate that it is not a criminal justice outcome, but it is the optics of it is good. However, we have to also remember that holding public officials accountable is not the be-all and end-all. In any act of bribery or alleged bribery, there is a giver and a taker. Now, we have focused a great deal on people who are alleged to take. But actually, we also need to think about the people who give. And public accountability is essential, and having information in the public space is what is key here. Because public accountability can't happen when investigations and everything else happen with zero public communication. So this is a very good example of how public accountability can work, and if the government is committed to this level of accountability going forward, it should ensure that as much information is publicly disseminated as possible.
Asoka Obesekar, Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka, thank you for joining us.
With pleasure, Sonali.
Coming up on the other side of this break, the challenges facing Sri Lanka's microfinance sector. Welcome back to Biz1st Review 360. Magnifying microfinance, the way forward. This is a forum that has been organized for the 18th of this month. We spoke to the Chief Operating Officer of K-Seeds Investments Private Limited, Naini Pereira, regarding the objectives of this forum and the challenges that are facing the microfinance sector. It's a crucial sector in any economy, but it's not often spoken about. I'm talking, of course, about the microfinance sector. And to talk about the challenges facing the microfinance sector in Sri Lanka, we're joined by Naini Pereira. She's the Chief Operating Officer of K-Seeds Investments Private Limited, and she's going to run us through the Magnifying Microfinance, the Way Forward, an awareness program that has been scheduled for the 18th of August. Naini, thank you very much for coming on the show. Let me start by asking you, what are the objectives of this program, Magnifying Microfinance?
Yes, I'll start it saying who K-Seeds is, and we are a boutique type of investment banking company and also involved in providing financial advisory services such as treasury management and balance sheet restructuring and debt and equity placement, and also other advisory services relating to mergers, acquisition and valuation likewise. So we actually started at the beginning of the year. Talking about the awareness program, Magnifying Microfinance, the way forward, the purpose is we have identified the need and the requirement of more focus on the microfinance industry at the moment, and also magnifying microfinance. So what we want to do is actually we want to magnify the focus on microfinance industry and increase the awareness in the industry. We have understood and identified the importance of the microfinance industry at the moment. So we want to bring the same thing and to bring the awareness of the people who are involved in the microfinance industry and investors as well as those who are directly and indirectly involved in the industry to this forum.
What are the prevailing market conditions like for microfinance in Sri Lanka?
I would say when it comes to the market condition, I'll first explain what's the industry. It's the structure of that we have. You will have the beneficiaries of the microfinance industry as well as the service provider, and there will be a regulatory framework as well. There are several categories in the microfinance industry like the rural cooperative banks as well as the thrift and credit corporate providers for small communities, and then it comes to the licensed and specialized banking companies and microfinance industries from starting from the NGOs.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of talk about microfinance in the past. People who've been involved in microfinance are very intricately connected with the rural economy as well. And one of the biggest segments of borrowers for the microfinance sector is made up of rural women. What can you say about how microfinance helps to empower?
Yes, actually from the overall, even considering Sri Lanka, from the overall borrowers, it's about 60% covers it's a female participants, and from them also, as you mentioned very rightly, it's 90 to 95% covered in the rural area women segment, and the main reason being it's actually the current economic condition, which is very difficult. One person of the family bearing the burden of all the expenses in the family, and especially husband being the breadwinner of the family and housewife being staying at home. So it creates a situation for them when they have more time to get engaged in their own business. So in this situation, microfinance service providers, they brings a helping hand by providing loans to start their own cottage business and being a helping hand to their own family. So
what kind of businesses are they getting into?
They start their own usually into various industries by most of them are into the garment industry, providing different types of garments, and also into the food providing. It's actually, I cannot you name it, it's in the it covers everything.
One of the key issues when talking about microfinance is the challenge in acquiring funding.
Yeah.
Getting people to fund these projects and creating that sort of confidence. What's your take on the challenges and also the opportunities that are ahead?
Yeah, as you very correctly said, the very first challenge is the funding for the microfinance institutions, and what we would, that is one of the main concerns that we will be addressing at the forum. We have already invited private fund equity providers as well as banking institutions to take part in this event. So there will be an opportunity for those who are participating in the event to discuss and raise questions in this regard, especially talking about the requirement of getting the loans directly from the banks and private equity fund providers to the grassroots level of the microfinance companies, because it's easy for them to take loans from the banks rather than mobilizing the funds of the their people or their customers, because that is actually a risk, and in a regulated environment that is restricted in Sri Lanka at the moment. So that is one of the main areas that we will be discussing and addressing the forum as well.
You spoke about the regulatory environment. What is the regulatory environment like right now in Sri Lanka? We saw fairly recently there was a lot of talk about the need to increase regulations in the financial services sector. Do you think that regulation on microfinance in Sri Lanka, is it too restrictive? Is there a need to relax the regulations? What's the regulatory environment like?
Yeah, I'll start answering your first question. I would say our understanding is that there should be a regulated environment in the microfinance industry, because as per the recent statistics we have, there has been about 14,000 microfinance providers in the Sri Lanka, and among them 50% are inactive. So due to various reasons, either they don't have the required knowledge or how to maintain the liquidity levels as such. And at the same time, it's government and the central bank, they have identified the need of having regulated environment or regulated entities in the microfinance industry. This creates a stabilized situation in the industry, and especially avoiding people such as unregulated microfinance companies, for example, those who are providing loans to the companies. And for example, like there are still in Sri Lanka, there's a community who goes beyond these individual loan providers, so you call them polymudalalis. So, and then that is a difficult situation for the borrowers as well as for the microfinance service providers who are doing their job in a proper manner. So creating a regulated environment, it will eliminate such difficult situations in the industry, and it will uplift the standard of the industry, and it will bring attention of so many investors as well.
Now, can I say, in the microfinance sector, you're working a lot with the informal sector of the economy.
Yeah.
Does this create problems in recoveries? Is there a very high rate of default?
There is a problem in the recovery section, but that is, again, we will be discussing in the forum, for example, what are the problems they are facing, how they are going to overcome that. And usually microfinance companies, they have a ratio that they should be maintaining total capital to the core capital and liquidity level. So based on that, they are maintaining what is the minimum and the maximum amount, borrowed amount that they should be having. But as you mentioned, yes, there are problems in recovering amounts, but that again can be maintained by creating regulated environment and awareness through awareness.
Let's talk about the future of microfinance in Sri Lanka. Is it positive, negative? Your thoughts?
Our thought is it's going to be positive. That is why, in fact, we started awareness programs and cases. Cases is not only for microfinance. We are a financial advisory service provider. We don't have a limit to the industry we are focusing on. But we have seen a trend in the microfinance industry where there will be a boom in near future. It won't be at a rapid rate, but we believe this program would be a stepping stone for those who are interested in uplifting their companies, who are engaged in the microfinance service providing area. And it will be a positive thing, because especially the government and the central bank getting together and creating a regulated environment. Even though initially it will be at a level of very lower speed, but gradually companies will get in line with the requirement, because we are going to discuss the advantages and how companies are going to benefit by following and being implying with the regulated requirement of the Microfinance Act of 2016.
Thank you very much, Nani, for coming on Biz1st Review 360. It's been enlightening. We wish you all the best for magnifying microfinance the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap of our show tonight. Don't forget to look us up on Facebook at Biz1st Review 360. That's 1ST and 360 in numerals. I'll see you again, same time, same place next week. Good night and good luck.